Welcome to the premiere of the 21st Century Business Forum. I'm Julio Malara, CEO and executive producer of the Forum. We're pleased you've joined us for this inaugural event to kick off the new year. Everyone in business across America is facing challenges. We're all looking for ideas, insights, and inspiration to succeed in 2021. This forum aims to provide that each month from the top business minds and thought leaders across our country. We're honored to have John Gordon as the host of the 21st Century Business Forum. John is a 10-time best-selling author and a world-renowned keynote speaker. So here's your host, Mr. John Gordon.
Thank you, Julio, for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be part of the 21st Century Business Forum. I'm really looking forward to doing this every month with you, but I'm really excited about this inaugural Business Forum with our special guest, Steve Forbes. He's the editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, a former presidential candidate, and also his newest venture is an amazing podcast titled What's Next. He engages some of the greatest business leaders and economic forecasters of our time. And Steve, we now get to engage with you. What an honor, what a great opportunity. Welcome, Steve.
Well, it's a great honor to be with you. Thank you, John, and very, very privileged to be part of this inaugural effort at a time of extraordinary challenge and opportunity as well.
That's a great way to look at it, Steve. We are a week away from inauguration. 2020 is behind us. What a year it's been. What do you see as the major trends and events coming this year?
Well, obviously, no tears were shed for the demise of 2020. No one could have foreseen what was going to take place a year ago, which should always make us humble about the future, both good things and the polite way of saying challenging things. The new year is going to, I think, really be a challenge in terms of getting these vaccines out. It's very exciting what's happening there in therapeutics. As we do that and people become confident as spring rolls around, that indeed the economy can get back to full-throated, you might say, commerce. It'll take a while to overcome the adverse impacts of COVID-19, but at least we can see that coming to an end, or at least under real control, instead of these fears of lockdowns and states doing things that hurt commerce and end up doing more harm than good in terms of fighting this dread disease. So I think the key thing is we're going to avoid big tax increases and the like. And the key thing is to make sure, both on the national level and state level, we don't suffocate this nascent economy, this recovering economy, with massive new regulations. One of the most exciting things that was happening before COVID-19 hit, John, was the rise in the startups of new businesses. That had been declining or on a plateau for over a generation. There was once a great strength of the American economy. That's how we created the big companies of the future. You look at Google, you look at other big companies like Facebook 20, 25 years ago, they were nothing. They were mere babies. Then they became these giants. We want new giants, dynamic giants of the future, keep that competitive atmosphere. And so COVID obviously stopped this business formation rise. We have to make sure that we remove the obstacles, tax and regulatory, so we once again play to our great strength, both creating prosperity here at home and competing with other companies and countries around the world. Let's play to our strength, and small business is a key part of it, and that's what we should be focusing on, both on this local and federal level.
Steve, do you see a big economic stimulus coming, though, in this year?
I think there will be probably one more stimulus package, and they should be called relief packages. They're not really stimulus in the way that a big tax cut would be, or removing barriers to people doing business with each other would be. This is really dealing with a disaster. We all know after a natural disaster like a hurricane, you pour in resources to try to rebuild, that people get back on their feet again. And so that's what the final package should be. It's a relief package. And so I don't mind, when you have a disease like this or a disaster like this that literally costs trillions of dollars in lost economic activity, a big spending program by the federal government is absolutely in order, as if it was fighting a major war, as we did with World War II, saving civilization. So one more round of checks to individuals. Even though I'm a conservative, I would support that. some other measures. And one of the things they got to do, I hope, in any future relief bill is remove some of the arbitrary obstacles and barriers to, for example, the payroll protection program. They had an arbitrary number on how much of the money had to go for payroll. Well, as you know, a lot of businesses, rent and other costs are a big part, even more than payroll. So get these restrictions out of the way. Get the Federal Reserve's Main Street lending program underway for small and medium-sized businesses, because there are a lot of casualties out there, but a lot of casualties can be overcome or avoided if we do a proper relief bill and not use it as a way to bail out states that have mismanaged their finances, or giveaways to things like the Kennedy Center. Kennedy Center is fine, but you don't need to give $25, $35 million of taxpayer money to it. A lot of other worthy institutions out there. So make it a good package. And with Republicans doing as well, we didn't keep the White House, but doing as well as they did at other levels, hopefully we have leverage to make sure we get a real relief bill instead of a political giveaway.
Great advice, Steve. So Forbes is a legacy print magazine in an industry that has been disrupted, but you were at the forefront of the digital transformation. What allowed you to see what was happening? How did you move early, take action, and then embrace the changes necessary to create such a successful company and an amazing brand?
Well, one of the things they always tell you, act as if you're a startup instead of a legacy company. Easier said than done in the real world. And it's true, the rise of the internet blew away most of what I had learned over the decades in the print business, legacy print business. But one of the things you always have to do, and I always try to remind ourselves and our people remind themselves, is what Peter Drucker, the late great management guru who wrote a number of business books, still read in some of the business schools today. And he said, organizations should always remind themselves, whether in the public sector, private sector, always remind yourself, what is your purpose? What is your mission? What is it you are trying to do? And if you remind yourself of what it is you're trying to do, you get less caught up and hung up when the means to achieve those goals substantially change. And human nature being what it is, you get caught up in the way you've always done things, and you don't respond quickly to change. We saw that most tragically, and there are numerous other examples of Kodak and the rise of digital photography. And the thing to keep in mind, when a new technology comes along, sometimes there's a lot of hype, but oftentimes the initial forays of the new technology are very sloppy, very inefficient, very expensive. People wonder, what's the big deal about that? But then you have the so-called learning curve, and you make these things better and better, as happened with digital photography. And Kodak filed for bankruptcy back in, I think, in 2012. So in our case, when we started Forbes.com in the mid-1990s, as other publishers were doing, we recognized there was more to electronic publishing than just putting a page on the screen and saying, we're in electronic publishing. Very, very different medium. And so we separated Forbes.com from the print operation, put it in a separate building, separate staff, separate reporting structure, because we knew human nature being what it is, print would always dominate anything at hand for their immediate purposes. It's just human nature. So Forbes.com was allowed to grow on its own. Another thing we did was we didn't just have the content depend on Forbes magazine. We went to outside sources for content. And that was a breakthrough that even today, a lot of print companies don't realize to do that. About 99% of the content on Forbes.com today is not from Forbes magazine, but from outside contributors. So over the years, we attracted tens of millions of people online. Today, we have over 3,000 contracted contributors. We do a lot of other things, licensing. We do a lot of events. We do a lot of partnerships and various projects. So today, print is about less than 10% of our revenue. And even the advertising on Forbes.com is maybe 60, 70% and declining because of these other activities. But the bottom line in all this is, we're still our main mission. My grandfather said the purpose of business is to produce happiness. That's what they call entrepreneurial. That's his version of entrepreneurial capitalism. And so by keeping in mind what it is we're trying to do, we are able to make and continue to make a transition. I'll close by saying, my father liked to say, if you think you've arrived, you're ready to be shown the door. The world is constantly changing, and you have to change with it, remembering what it is you're trying to do, ultimately.
I love that. What advice would you give to leaders and companies facing disruption right now?
If they're depending on the kind of disruption they're facing, ask themselves, what is it that what business are we in, or is the disruption of a kind where the business is in effect going away, shrinking away? You obviously have, if you have a successful business, skill sets. What can those skills, if your fundamentally business is just fundamentally changed, like if you're a buggy whip manufacturer 130 years ago, you have to ask yourself, what kind of skills do we have that could be used for this new world, that we could apply to this new world? And so you have to keep constantly doing that. And then it's an art. That's why there's no science to management. Yes, obviously there's a science to mastering things like accounting and putting in good supply chains and the like, but it ultimately is an art. And trying to adapt to the change without destroying yourself, but not letting the old ways, as happened with Kodak and with others, do yourself in. You take a company like IBM, doing fine today, but it nearly went bust in the early 1990s because of the rise of PCs, personal computers. They knew the business. They knew it was rising up. They even had products, but they had this mainframe mentality, so their products weren't really what the marketplace demanded, and they nearly went to the corporate graveyard in the early 90s. They came back, unlike Kodak. But keep asking yourself, take a few minutes, maybe on the weekend or when you're playing around on the golf course or something, just put your mind on what skills do we have, what skills do we need, and what changes do we make, and realize sometimes those changes are going to be very painful in terms of change of personnel and change of maybe even location. It's not easy. It's not for everyone. As the saying goes, we live in an environment where you can either sleep well or eat well, but not both.
So good. Let's talk about your amazing podcast, What's Ahead. Are you enjoying doing that?
Very much so. The prepping for these things, as you know, is like prepping for an exam, but also lets you learn a lot and an excuse to have good conversations with some people from whom you can learn a lot, and your viewers and listeners can learn a lot. For example, several months, about a year ago now almost, I did a podcast with Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck, African-American, learned the value of education from his father. His father, he said, would have been CEO of any company, but he didn't have the opportunity. He made sure Ken did. But Ken Frazier made the point with Merck. He says, a great company has to have not only a mission, but a soul in terms of what are you here trying to do. And he is tough both in terms of trying to achieve great goals. They're in the forefront of the vaccine movement against COVID-19. But also, if bad people are trying to do things to you, there was a case where they had problems with a certain drug, and so some of the trial bar thought this would be easy pickings, and he said no. If somebody can prove they're harmed by the drug, we will make restitution. We'll come to a settlement. But if it's a case of just piling up people and hoping you can do a shakedown, not going to do it. And he resisted it. So that kind of rock-like integrity is very inspiring. Martine Rothblatt, who created Sirius XM radio, Sirius Radio, she's now in the drug business, so to speak. Her daughter got a rare disease a number of years ago, about 25 years ago, lethal in 2 to 3 years. So she dropped the communications business, where she'd been a huge success, and devoted her energies to coming up with a treatment for that disease. And against enormous odds, she put together a team. They did it. Her daughter is now in her early 30s. And this rare disease, where you died within 2 or 3 years, now tens of thousands of people are alive today because of the work that Martine Rothblatt did. And she's now also at work and coming up with creating organs for heart replacements, in terms of liver replacements, lung replacements. As you know, there's a long line of people who need those transplants, but there are not enough donors. She's coming up with a way to create those organs so that you don't have to worry about a donor. You'll get what you need. Like she says, a spare part to a car. And she's already taken lungs that doctors had rejected for transplants because of what they thought were some flaws. She came up with a way, in effect, to cure those flaws. And there are over 150 people in the last year or so who are alive because of the work she did on those kinds of lung transplants. So those kinds of things are very inspiring. And then you, Barbara Barrett, who has created the U.S. Space Force, she had to raise her family at the age of 13, 5 siblings and a mother. Their father suddenly died, and the mother was incapacitated, and she had, in effect, at the age of 13, become the breadwinner. She became later a very successful businesswoman. She was the first civilian woman to land an F-18 fighter aircraft on a moving aircraft carrier. And in her late 50s, she trained in Russia with another person to be an astronaut, to go to the International Space Station. And while she was going through intense training, this in her late 50s, being an astronaut, she had to learn the Russian language at the same time. So people like this, you say, wow, this is quite a world out there. And Dr. Keith Smith, just to talk with him, he's the head of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. How is it that in this hospital with over 115 board-certified surgeons, he can do operations like knee replacements and the like, all over 100 different kinds of operations, and his fees at his hospital are about 1/5 to 1/2 of what a normal hospital would charge. He posts all prices online, all inclusive. If the procedure is more expensive, they eat the cost of it. So that's a lesson to healthcare. So these kinds of people are you get to talk to is you learn and you're inspired that despite all the problems we have today, creativity, innovation, if you have an environment that allows that to flourish, by golly, not only will they do well, but all of us will benefit from it.
Is there one guest or one thing you learned on your podcast that you believe will impact our world the most and our future?
Well, I love what Dr. Keith Smith is doing in healthcare, showing that, yes, there is a better way to deliver better healthcare at less cost, substantially less cost. That's a great thing. In terms of what Martine Rothblatt is doing or what Judy Faulkner is doing with Epic Systems in terms of medical records, all of these things, I take inspiration. And what it is the words are easy to say, but it's nice to see what you might call flesh and blood put on these things. Having vision, stick-to-itiveness. You're going to go through a lot of frustration and failure. Carl Schramm, who is an entrepreneur, is also an academic, and he headed the Kauffman Foundation for a number of years and is doing other work today. He was both a successful entrepreneur and an academic, and what he's done a lot of study on small businesses. How many are created each year? And he's the one who discovered and was able to help get people to quantify the drought we had in business startups starting over 20 years ago because of excess regulation and indeed some cases taxation. And some of his findings are very inspiring. He says, we all think that if you're not a great entrepreneur by the age of 25, it's over and out for you. No, he said most new businesses, the average median age is 38 or 39. He said if you're in your 50s or 60s, you'll have a 5 times better chance of starting a successful business than you are in your 20s. So as Yogi Berra said, it's not over till it's over, and it's very true.
I always love that advice. In terms of
by the way, one other thing in terms of inspiration is in terms of having a soul and having a mission is the restaurant business, which has been devastated in many parts of the country because of COVID-19. One of the great restaurateurs in New York has come up with over 20 great restaurants and also the national chain Shake Shack for great burgers and the like. Danny Meyer talks about how you have to have that passion, creativity, and you'll get setbacks along the way. But if you have that sense of mission, failure will be a detour, but not a dead end.
You're admired for your brilliance and your uncanny ability to see the future, to predict the future in terms of markets. You've also won the Crystal Owl 4 times. I have to say that, which is very impressive. What do you see in terms of the markets for 2021?
Well, in terms of the markets, I have to preface it, and Rolf has heard me, my friend Rolf McAllister has heard this before, and that is what my grandfather liked to say. He founded our company. He was an immigrant, one of 10 children, grade school education, but he started Forbes in 1917. And he liked to say, you make more money selling the advice than following it. So as that warning to your audience, I think the markets are going to be choppy short term because of all the uncertainties out there, and making sure these things that we think are going to happen do happen. But I always advise people to treat your portfolio's investments in two ways. One, of course, you have to recognize that emotions are your enemy. Everyone's a disciplined investor until the market goes down. Then you say, oh, is it too late to get out? And the stocks are the only thing in the world, when they're going up in price, people want more of them. When they're going down in price, people want to get rid of them, the opposite of traditional retailing. But you should divide it mentally into two parts. One is your retirement monies, whether it's a 401k or an IRA or whatever, Keogh plan, whatever. And that is, if you don't have time to really study these things, find a few index funds with low expenses and just put in the money, whether you do it annually or quarterly or whatever the thing is, or if your company has a matching 401k, always just put the money in there, put it in something that's broad-based, and ignore it. Because over time, this country always recovers, stocks always recover. And if you have a downturn, severe downturn, that means your money is going to be buying more shares, dollar cost averaging. And over time, you'll do very well. If you're a young person, just do that, and you're going to do better than most money managers. For your own individual portfolios, it depends on whether you try to focus on a certain area, value stocks and the like, or try to find special situations, or you feel you have a knowledge of a certain kind of technology where you can bring some unique knowledge to bear, go right ahead. But trying to time the market is treacherous. So the only way you should time the market is not get out, suddenly get out. But if you have to, you feel really things are going to go hell in a handbasket, buy some puts. Don't necessarily clean out your portfolio. Buy some puts if you think the market's going down. It's a form of insurance, but that way you're not going to be whipsawed by losses and gains and the like. And the other thing is, if you want to time these things, is recognize that if you are wrong, cut your losses. Research has shown that taking a loss is psychologically 5 times more painful than the satisfaction you get out of a gain, which is why no one likes to own up to their losses. That's why cocktail parties, everyone is an investment genius. Or if they had a loss, they'll make sure they had 10 successes to offset it. And so you have to recognize about that. If you have to cut your loss, cut it and move on. And the other thing is, when you take a profit and the stock continues to go up, don't beat yourself on it. As the old saying goes, you never go broke taking a profit. So try to keep your emotions in check. And in the next year, just expect a lot of turbulence. But ultimately, I see signs we're starting to get things right, even though we had some results in the election that I wasn't particularly pleased with. But there's some good stirrings in the country, even in a state like California, where they defeated referendums that would have been very harmful, like rent control, and they freed up Uber and Lyft from the state trying to, in effect, destroy their business model. They voted down a big tax increase on commercial properties. So even in California, there are rays of sunshine.
That's good to know. Is there a sign that we can look to in the new year that will tell us if the market's going to go down? Is there some event or incident that we can look to?
Well, one thing to look to, and it's off the radar today, and that is our friends at the Federal Reserve, our central bank. And they have this strange notion that prosperity causes inflation. So if things start to go well, they feel they have to slow it down. They compare it to cooling off an engine. The economy is not an engine. Economy is people, and we're not engines. And so stop treating us like a piece of machinery and thinking you can manage us, 330 million people and 7 billion people around the world, by manipulating interest rates. It's one of the great fallacies of our era. So our friends at the Federal Reserve have these mistaken notions. And one of the things they may do is end up creating too much or even too little money because they really don't know what they're doing. So just look on a daily basis at the gold price. For a variety of reasons, which I won't bore you with now, but for a variety of reasons, gold keeps its intrinsic value better than anything on this earth and has for 4,000 years. So when you see the price of gold fluctuate, it's really not the value of gold that is changing, but the value of the dollar that is changing, or people's perceptions about the future value of the dollar or the yen or the euro. So gold is the North Star, and everything revolves around it. And so if you just look at the price of gold, it's gone up in the last year or so. That's a warning light that maybe they're going to do things wrong. If it stays steady in price, good. And if you buy gold, don't do it as an investment, but treat it like you would an insurance policy if things go dreadfully wrong. It's not an investment, it's an insurance policy. So look at that price to get a gauge whether our central bank is doing things wrong. And the other things you just have to look for, and I think with Republicans having done well in various levels at this election, is what's happening on the regulatory side. It doesn't get daily headlines, but it is so important to the kind of environment we have.
That's really incredible advice. That's going to help me a lot in my own personal investments, so I appreciate that. I know it's going to help a lot of people as well. When you ran for president, you were a big believer in the flat tax. I always thought that was one of the greatest ideas a politician had put forth. Do you still believe that a flat tax could work, and what would the rate be?
A flat tax would work. What it would do is take our current income tax code and all the attendant rules and regulations, 10 million words, and throw them out. I used to say bury them, but the EPA probably wouldn't allow something so toxic to be put in the soil. But anyway, get rid of it, and to put in a single simple rate. My rate, and others have variations of it, would have been 17%. With generous deductions for adults and for kids. So a family of four, for example, would pay no federal income tax on their first $52,800 of salary. And above that, you'd pay only 17 cents on the dollar. There'd be no tax on your savings. You'd have the same kind of simplicity on the corporate side. And the IRS tells us we spend 6 billion hours a year filling out tax forms. Experts estimate we spend over $200 billion a year complying with this monstrosity, with all the words and attendant regulations comes to more than 10 million words. And just think of the opportunity cost. Go back 20 years. Take those over 100 billion hours wasted, literally trillions of dollars wasted. And imagine if all those resources and time and brain power, instead of coping with this idiot code, had instead be used to create new products, new services, new medical devices, new cures for diseases, how much better off we all would have been. Huge opportunity costs. We haven't had it here yet, but eventually I think it will happen. If Donald Trump had been reelected, I think he has made favorable noises about it in the past. He might have done it in a second term. We're going to keep fighting on it because over 30 countries around the world have had it. So this isn't just a theory, John. This is something that has been tried and true in the real world, and it has worked. It has had real success. So keep fighting. That's all you can do. I'm not going to let the other side get the final word on this. And by the way, people say, what happens to all the IRS agents and tax lawyers and the like? Even though I'm a conservative, I would support a program of job retraining for IRS agents.
That's a great idea. In terms of the tax code like that, if you simplify it and you remove a lot of the loopholes and deductions, wouldn't that raise more money from all the people that are very wealthy and not paying taxes?
Yeah, I designed my plan, John, so that no one would have a tax increase. So you couldn't play the game of who's going to win, who's going to lose. You design it so everyone loses. And within 3 or 4 years of the new code, you would have you not only match previous revenue, but it would succeed previous revenue. Again, other countries that have tried this have had no problem with the tax revenue. The problem has always been over time spending, not the revenue, but the spending. They always want to spend more than they have. But this would be a great revenue generator. And I think it would remove a huge source of political corruption and frustration to people. And so eventually I think we'll get it to happen. But in the meantime, the resistors do resist that one. when I ran for president back in 1996 in the New Hampshire primary, H&R Block sent a mailing to the voters of New Hampshire warning of the impending end of civilization if this simplification came along. So the empire will strike back, but eventually I think we'll get it.
I couldn't agree more. Steve, but so many small businesses struggling and facing uncertainty. What are some tips that you have for them in terms of how they can lead through this time, how they could survive and even thrive into the future?
Well, there it's depending on the kind of business you have and the kind of state environment you have. Well, I live in the New York region. I live in the state of New Jersey. But the authorities, especially in New York City, have been very hostile to the restaurant industry, even though before COVID it employed 300,000 people. It was one of the attractions of New York. A lot of the great restaurants there, like you go to a place like New Orleans, you want to see what some of the great restaurants are. And so the mayor and even the governor have been very hostile to an industry, delaying openings and putting on all these restrictions, unnecessary for the health of the public. So it depends on where you are, but you just have to hang on, work with your bankers, and try to hang on, see if you can get some one of these government programs, whether PPP or something like that can help out, and hang on, and then look around you and ask yourself, things will get better. This disease will be conquered or put under control where we can really get back to some normal environment. And then move ahead and ask yourself what skills you have. But the key thing is survival, and you're going to have to make some very tough decisions in doing that, especially when you have an environment where the political authorities just seem to be oblivious to what you're trying to do, not only for yourself, but the people who work for you and ultimately your customers. They just don't seem to get it.
I agree with that. In terms of the future, Steve, what are you excited about? I know we've been talking a lot about challenges, but also we know that there's a lot of opportunities, as you mentioned earlier. So as you think about the future, what excites you and what are you looking forward to?
Well, in terms of the future, I think eventually we'll get things right to create a better environment. And one of the areas where I think you're going to see profoundly positive change is healthcare, which is now about 18% of our economy. And when you look at what great people are doing, whether it's Keith Smith or some of the great research that has been going on in terms of cures for diseases, real progress is being made against cancer. I think we're going to make huge progress against dementia, Alzheimer's, which is with an aging population is going to be critically important. There's some new realizations there. And so I think, just take Alzheimer's. They always thought that plaques and that they found in your brain as a result of Alzheimer's and other things in your brain were the cause of the disease. Now they're realizing that plaques and tangles are a result of the disease. And there may be other causes, whether it's genetic or trying to re-stimulate the brain. Very exciting research being done there for the first time in 100 years, conceptual breakthroughs there. So I think in the whole healthcare industry and the delivery of healthcare, I think we're going to finally see in the next decade what sounds today like a utopia. More healthcare, better healthcare at less cost. How about that? And two quick examples in closing on that one. We've already seen it work. One is LASIK surgery for the eyes. So we have it. You may not have to use these things. That today, in just raw dollar terms, is about half of what it cost 10 or 12 years ago. Better results. Why? Because it's not covered by third-party insurers. It's between you and the provider. So the provider has every incentive to make it more affordable and better for you. The other big area is cosmetic surgery, plastic surgery. Huge growth there, huge technological innovations, and yet they don't have the kind of inflation you've had in the rest of healthcare. Why? Unless it's a result of disease or accident, it's between you and the provider. So if you want a procedure done, you scope it out like you would anything else. So you have this huge boom in this medical area. And again, you don't have the kind of rapidly rising costs, and you get better and better results as more and more experience is out there. So we know from real world experience this can work. And by the way, if you want to see one country where I think we'll eventually get this kind of healthcare system here, where they have top flight surgeons, they have excellent healthcare results, some of the best hospitals in the region in the world, Singapore. And Singapore has coverage for everybody. And guess what? Their costs, because they rely on the private market, are 25%, 30% of what they are here. Even though their surgeons go to the best schools in the world, their longevity is higher than the US, and they do it for a fraction of the cost. So I think I'm very excited, and all the good things I think are going to ultimately happen in healthcare if we make sure the government doesn't take it over.
So you're obviously a big believer in private healthcare.
Yes, and that is that not people don't like the word private. I just call it patient-controlled healthcare, where the patient is in charge. The patient makes the decision. And that's not the system we have today. And I don't point to villains, because the system evolved for a variety of reasons. And where the patient stands, I like to point out, is the patient's not in charge. And the proof of it is the lousiest motel in America wouldn't dare put you in a room with another guest, a sick guest with a curtain in between, as they routinely do in so many of our hospitals. So put the patient in charge, and you'll see robes that actually fit, and you don't need an instruction manual to how to get them on, and good private rooms. I think very positive changes are coming.
Steve Forbes, thank you so much for joining me on the 21st Century Business Forum. It was an honor to have you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. Who better to help us launch the 21st Century Business Forum than an icon like Steve Forbes? We appreciate him being here and sharing his insights. We also want to thank our sponsors who made this broadcast available. We invite you and your friends to join us next month, February 10th, when John will sit down with best-selling author and leadership expert John Maxwell. And remember, the best is yet to come.